Hi my friends, my name is Helena and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the new Scream, Scream 2022, Scream 5, whatever you want to call it. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I saw it last night and I mean my my top line review is that it was excellent. Oh my gosh, I really enjoyed it. There was I think there's literally one thing that I just absolutely hated, and we'll get to that. But for the most part, I was so into it. It was not. I mean, there were definitely things that happened that I was expecting, but a huge chunk of it was just not what I was expecting at all. And it went in a lot of different directions, and I feel like they got a lot of stuff in without making it feel overstuffed or they were trying to do too much. It was a really tight balancing act that I feel like they had to walk. A lot of different factors, which again we're going to get into. This review is going to get into everything: who Ghostface is, why Ghostface is, who lives, who dies, and all other different plot points. So if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want to be spoiled, you can just click right off and come back when you've seen it. I definitely recommend that this is something that you go into with as little information as possible. I went in fairly unspoiled and I ended up being surprised by a lot of things, and it's to me it's such a great experience to be surprised by a movie. So if you're at all interested in seeing it, I definitely recommend you go in unspoiled. But for those of you who have seen it and who are sticking around, let's get into it. So the main plot of the story is that this girl, Sam, who is the secret love child of Billy Loomis and some other girl that went to high school with the original cast, we'll get to that later, returns to town after her sister Tara is attacked but not killed by Ghostface. So Sam goes back to Woodsboro with her boyfriend Richie, and we also meet the whole other cast of characters, which are Tara's friends. They include Chad and Mindy, who are the niece and nephew of original character Randy Meeks. There is also Liv, Wes, who is the now Sheriff Judy's son, and Amber. Right off the bat, Amber is extremely overprotective of Tara and is very suspicious of Sam and Richie. The legacy characters of Sydney, Gale, and Dewey very much take a back seat in this story. Dewey is definitely the most upfront of the three of them, but it's very much the story of this new cast and their connection to the original murders and just Woodsboro in general. So there are three major themes that are kind of covered by the plot, and I think the movie does a really good job of blending them and kind of dovetailing them and getting a coherent message. I think it would have been really easy for this movie to feel overstuffed and it was doing too much, but each kind of theme sort of played into the other one, and I think it was really smartly sort of wrapped up so that it felt like a coherent narrative and not just throwing shit at the walls and seeing what sticks. So the first theme is the most obvious one, seeing as how each entry into the Scream franchise is some commentary on that movie's place within the franchise. So obviously you had the original, which was just generally scary movies, then it was sequels, then it was trilogies, then it was remakes. So of course for this one we are getting into the requels. I actually thought that this movie bucked a lot of the conventions of what we've come to know the requel or the legacy sequel to be. So of course we're talking about things like the new Halloween trilogy, the new Candyman, and even going outside of horror and slashers, there's the new Ghostbusters and Star Wars. And kind of the through line that I found through all of these movies is the idea that it is almost a soft reboot. Talking specifically about Halloween and Candyman, they both do the same thing. Well, first of all, they're both just titled what the original movie was called, which this movie also does. To be fair, I was one of the people who was annoyed that this wasn't actually called Scream 5, but I've come around to the fact that well, first of all, it part of it is a marketing thing, but it obviously is also a commentary on the fact that this is kind of what movies have been doing lately. Again, specifically talking about the new Halloween was just called Halloween, the new Candyman was just called Candyman. And what those movies do, which this movie does not, is they kind of do a soft reboot. So the events of Halloween 2018 completely disregard all of the other sequels that have come after it. It was just the first one in 1978 and then 2018. And this Scream doesn't do that. It doesn't reset the continuity, and it actually, for all its talk about how it's about going back to the original, it incorporates factors from all the other sequels. So the scene where Tara is scrolling through the cast list of Stab, that's obviously from 2 because we see Tori Spelling and Luke Wilson, and she answers that Heather Graham played Casey in the movie. And just the existence of Stab in general is obviously tied to 2 because that is the movie where that franchise was introduced. And then from 3 we get get a cameo from Heather Matarazzo as Martha Meeks. She is Chad and Mindy's mom. And there's also like this super quick reference where Sydney's talking about her husband and she says his name is Mark. So I have to believe that that's Mark Kincaid, Patrick Dempsey from 3. And then from 4, like we still have Judy and now we have her son. Also just the feel of this movie, like it felt like the spiritual successor to 4. Like it felt like the next logical step for where this franchise goes, both in terms of tone and in terms of what it was saying and who the killers ended up being. Like it was just the next logical progression for this movie. So it didn't feel like a requel in the way that like Halloween and Candyman have. The second sort of main thing that they get into is like the very overt acknowledgement that it is a new regime now running this franchise. Obviously, Wes Craven died in 2015, and while Kevin Williamson is on as a producer, he didn't write it. So there's very much this like self-awareness that it is like a new team and that people are like, will they be able to honor this legacy? Will this movie still feel like the other movies? Will this still feel like it's part of a series that a lot of people really love? There's even comments about stuff being like fan fiction-y, and I know that sometimes when a franchise gets turned over to a new team, it can kind of feel like that. And even like sort of the on-the-nose element of Sam being Billy's daughter, like that feels like something someone would write in a fan fiction about, you know, Billy's long-lost daughter. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely overt and very on the nose in the way that only this series can be, that they're aware of the regime change, they're aware that people might be a little bit skeptical, and they're still determined to really put out the best movie that they can and for it to honor the legacy and to feel like it's part of the series, which I think they succeed at. So then kind of like the biggest theme, everything that ties into the killer's motivation and is really like, if I had to say what the thesis statement of this movie is everything about toxic fandom. I feel like this was more of a commentary on the state of film in general and not like specific to just Scream or just horror or just slashers. But basically the killers, Richie and Amber, they are huge fans of the Stab movies in the same way that I and millions of other people are huge fans of the Scream movies. And we know throughout the course of the movie that A Stab 8 has recently come out and it has been very divisive, but their point is they are the hardcore fans. They know what the series is going to be, so they are going to make it what they think, what they know it should be, and what the people really want. I don't really think of Scream, and like even in this time where we're like testing the waters with a new creative team and it's very much sort of, the franchise is in very much sort of a transitional place, I don't really think of it as having a toxic fandom. Like I'm not super involved in like the online horror fandom, the online Scream fandom, so maybe I'm just like talking out of my ass and maybe there is like a huge section of the fandom that's like really toxic and this is specifically targeted to them and not like a lot of people keep bringing up Star Wars, which I know has a real toxic fandom. I'm not a Star Wars person, but I'm like a person who lives in the world and goes on the internet, so like I have seen the worst of the Star Wars stuff and like creators and actors and stuff and giving up their social media profiles because they're being harassed. So I have seen where this toxic fandom can go. But I will say, like, sometimes when I talk to people about, you know, just sort of generally about Scream, like, there is sort of almost this frustration, you know, before this movie, looking at the 4 prior movies of, like, you know, I think we're so used to so many slashers being villain-centered, so whether that's Halloween with Michael Myers or Friday the 13th with Jason Voorhees, which is ironic because he's not even the killer in the original movie, or Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy. Like, we're so used to slashers specifically being very villain-centered, and Scream isn't. Scream is protagonist-centered. Like, it's very much Sydney, or at least it was, at the center of the narrative. And even going back to the very first movie, like, as soon as they made the decision for the villain to be 2 different people, like, this was just never going to be a villain-centered series. If Ghostface is just an identity, just a costume that anybody can put on, like, there's no lore there in the way that there's lore to Michael Myers and there's lore to Jason Voorhees. Like, for what this franchise is, it makes the most sense for it to be protagonist, heroine centered, whether that's Sydney or kind of now sort of passing the torch to Sam. So like, I like to think of myself as not the kind of person that's like, no, this is what the movies are about, and if you think otherwise, you're wrong. Like, I like to think that everything's up for interpretation. I mean, trust me, I have had some interpretations of movies that have been completely out of pocket, so like, I'm not here to like judge people who maybe see Scream a lot differently than I do. And I think there is very much nowadays, and I think the internet has a lot to do with this, is just like for these huge franchises that like span decades, like at a certain point, I think fans like really do start to feel ownership over the product. And there's like a whole conversation to be had about like death of the author, blah, 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 that I'm not really interested in getting into. But like, I think especially when someone new takes over and it's like, okay, yeah, well, we trust Wes Craven, we trust Kevin Williamson to like tell the right story, whatever that is. But like, I don't know who these new guys are. Like, I don't, maybe necessarily trust them to get it right. Like, what do they know about it? And to be honest, I didn't see a lot of that when it was announced there was going to be a new Scream and that Radio Silence was going to head it. Like, I saw a lot of like, oh wow, Ready or Not banged, and like, I'm excited to see what else these guys can do. And if you've seen Ready or Not, like, that's obviously so inspired by Scream that, like, my faith is in these guys like 100% from the get-go. So again, I'm sure there are pockets of the internet that were very skeptical, but it didn't seem very specific to this movie. It felt like just a commentary of like where we are with fandom and film and tying that back into requels and, is it canon? Is it not canon? That's what I mean. It all kind of dovetailed like really nicely for me and it all sort of made sense. I don't know if I'm making any sense talking about it, but like when I saw it, I understood what they were going for, even if I can't articulate it as well as I would like. I really do think they did a good job of sort of incorporating all of these themes and bringing them together and having them sort of speak to each other and tell something coherent, as opposed to, like I said before, it's like, oh, we're just doing all this shit and, we'll see what works. I guess my only thing is, like, I don't know if another Scream movie is going to get greenlit. I think it's really tough right now to say what would be considered a success for a movie that gets released. In the middle of a pandemic and during a surge of a new variant. I know that the new Spider-Man did really well, and I have high hopes that this will do really well too. And I know that the creative team involved has said that they have more stories to tell with these characters in Woodsboro at this time. But I guess I just don't really know where the movie can go from here. Like, this, having the fans be the killers, like, is, to me, again, a logical progression from 4, where you have the killer basically want to make herself the new Sydney. So it makes sense as far as the series goes, but where do you go from the fans being the killers? Like, maybe I'm just not imaginative enough. That is 100% valid and probably true. But when the movie was over, I was like, I feel satisfied with this as a conclusion to the series. If they release another one, like, I will be very excited about it and I will go see it. But I don't know. Where do you take the series from here, I guess is my question. The only sort of idea I like kind of came up with would be if the killers in a future movie like were intentionally trying to make a bad movie, like they were just, it could be people who are tired of long-running series or slashers or horror in general and who want to put an end to it. I envision a movie where it's like nothing makes sense and it's all over the place and completely hard to follow, and that's like sort of a commentary on wanting to finally end something and how a lot of times these long-running series like go out with a whimper instead of a bang. But that would be so tough to pull off. Again, I would like to see it. If someone wants to attempt it, like, be my guest. Like, I'm just a person sitting here talking into a camera. Like, what do I know? But that could be really tough to pull off. But it's the only kind of thing I could think of like where the franchise goes from here. So I talked a lot about the motive, but let's talk about the killers. So I thought it was very interesting. I feel like they made the killers, the two of them, the person who was the most suspicious and the person who was the least suspicious. And I feel like that played with me the whole time because Amber was suspicious from the get-go because she was like very overprotective of Tara and she was like nasty to everybody. And, it was speculated early on, like, they're talking about Wes, like, it could be him, like he has a crush on Tara. If I can't have her, nobody can. And I was like, oh, maybe that's what's going on with Amber. Like that was kind of the vibe I was getting. But then I like kept second guessing myself because I'm like, oh, well, now it's like too obvious if she's the killer. So maybe this is a red herring. This whole series just has me like completely, like, I can't, like, I shouldn't even try to sit there and guess who the killer is. Like, because first of all, I'm going to find out, like, the movie's going to be over and they're going to tell me. But like, it has you second guessing yourself all the times because it uses your expectations against you, and then it knows that you're too savvy. So it's like, oh no, we're going to make it what you thought it was, because that's basically what they do with Billy, because Billy is sus the entirety of the movie. So you're like, well, it can't be him because he's too obviously suspicious, and then it is. So I just can't. But then on the other side of it, you have Richie, who is like genuinely a nice guy, or seems genuinely like a nice guy, not like a nice guy, but like a kind guy who doesn't know anything about Woodsboro or Stab or any of it, and who is constantly like, let's get out of here, like, it's dangerous here, like, I don't want to be here. Like, when they're leaving the hospital with Tara and she doesn't have her inhaler, like, he's very convincing of like, no, like, let's not stop, let's get out of here. And I think it also played into because like his character up until the reveal that he's the killer is very similar to Jack Quaid's character in The Boys, who again is like a genuinely nice person who like wrestles with his conscience and wants to do the right thing. And I went with my friend who I was with, and I remember turning to him like halfway through the movie. I'm like, he's basically playing his character from The Boys, and that should have been a hint, and it wasn't. Like, I was just like, oh, Richie's nice, whatever. So yeah, I thought that it was very clever to have, you know, the most suspicious and the least suspicious person end up being it, because it got me all twisted around. They also have a really good interaction, like at the beginning, where she's like very disdainful and suspicious of him. And so that also puts you off thinking that these two people are even working together. I will say for the first like 20-ish minutes, I want to say, I was convinced that the killer was Stu. I think that had been a theory that had been going around for a while, and I think it was like sticking in the back of my head, but there were just a lot of things that sort of led to that. So when Ghostface is playing the Stab trivia game with Tara at the beginning, and he asks her who the killer in Stab was, and she only says Billy, like, he almost sounds really pissed that she didn't remember Stu. And that makes sense. Like, if you're a super fan of the Stab movies, like, you'd be mad that people don't know everything about them. It was that, and then there were just like a couple lines of dialogue where people like, where Stu was just kind of getting put to the side a little bit, and it was like, oh, Billy Loomis and his friend. Like, it was stuff like that. So I kept thinking like, oh, is it going to be Stu? Like, he's back to like, you know, sort of put some respect on my name. I was there too. Like, you didn't remember that? Well, you're going to remember this. But obviously it was not. But I was so convinced it was for like the first 20 minutes, and then I was like mad at myself because I was like, I felt like I'd like spoiled the movie for myself, because it would have been such a crazy twist that, like, you know, to have predicted it like so far in advance like kind of would have ruined it. So I was glad I was wrong. And I'm not even really sure I would have liked that anyway. I know that there's like, oh, like, he didn't really die, you know, would the TV on his head really have killed him? But, and I know we've, you know, each movie they're never sure they're going to get another one, and again, we've now switched creative teams, so like the groundwork wouldn't necessarily have been laid out. But like, I feel like if Stu was just sitting in jail, we would have heard about it from somebody. Like, I do feel like Sydney would be like very Laurie Strode about it, like she'd want his location at all times if he was getting moved, like she, you know, would need to know that he was in there and in there for good. So I know that that was originally the plot, I think, of the third one, or I think the third one had a lot of plots. If you can't tell by watching it. I'm kidding. I do have a special affection for 3. But that was at some point an idea that was floated, was Stu coming back. But speaking of people who did come back, our legacy characters, I just love spending time with these characters. Like, I love all of them in different ways. Like, Dewey is just so sweet, and like, he means so well, and he's just like, unlike Richie, I mean, he is just like a genuinely good guy who is like out to do the right thing, and, you know, has been through so much, you know, lost his sister, and, you know, is a little goofy and maybe just not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he cares and he tries. Gail's a bad bitch. We love her. And like, I mean, Cindy Prescott is my hero. I know she's not real. I know she's fictional, but like, she rocks. I was hoping for them to be in it a bit more, because like, that for me is so the draw of the series, is the 3 of them. But like, I understand why they weren't. Like, at a certain point, like, if we want this to be a viable franchise, like, they are going to have to start to phase them out. Like, I don't know if Courtney Cox and Neve Campbell would come back for a sixth movie. Like, I don't know if they want to keep doing this. So like I get it, but it does break my heart a little bit because like I could just watch like 2 hours of them like kicking ass and taking names, and they're, I feel like I know them and I've been on this whole 25-year journey with them. So like that's kind of like one small thing about the movie, even though I get we're trying to tell new stories here, but like I would have loved more of them. But what we got of them was great. Like they have been through this before. They know what they're doing. I do kind of love that Sydney is just like, well, there's a ghost face, so I gotta go deal with this. Like it's just kind of sort of her job now. I mean, she does say like, she says she has children now, and it makes total sense to me that like if there's a ghost-faced killer out there, like she has to take care of it. Like, yeah, she wouldn't sleep. Like, how would she know that that person isn't eventually going to come after her and come after her kids? So like I totally understand. She's like, no, I got to deal with this, and she knows how. Like she's been through this a few times, and she knows her way around the block on this. And it was like, it was really hard to watch Dewey die. Like I knew he was going to. Like I think most people did. Again, like a hallmark of this series is its misdirection with marketing, going all the way back to everything with Drew Barrymore. So, it felt like they were leaning too far into like all the marketing stuff, like, oh, there's a lot of Dewey in this, and they were showing him a lot. And like I feel like David Arquette was making the most of like the, sort of talk show appearances. Like he was it seemed like he was sort of the face of the movie, of the legacy characters. So they were just leaning into it a little too hard that I was like, okay, yeah, he's definitely dead. But I'd hoped I was wrong. I had hoped they were trying to do the reverse psychology, I guess it would be, and make me think that Dewey was going to be dead because they were doing all this stuff with him. But then actually he wouldn't, but he was. And like, at least he got to go out a hero. He went out saving other people. It was a brutal, slow, lingering death. But he will go down remembered as a hero, and that is what he deserves, and that is what we all deserve of him. And it also just gives us like a great opportunity at the end for Gale to quite literally light Amber's ass up. Like, we love a fire. I feel like that's an element that has not been explored proficiently in this series. I would like to see more of it, but just really spectacular stuff. So the other thing about Gale is that, she's done writing books about all of these happenings, because there is like a scene where she almost feels responsible. Like if she hadn't written the books, they wouldn't have made the movies, and she feels like, her sort of ghoulishness has kind of kept this thing spiraling. And to that I would like to say I disagree. Obviously the first killing, would have happened regardless. And like the events of 2 would pretty much have still happened. Like maybe Mickey wouldn't have gotten involved, but Mrs. Loomis would have still gone after Sydney to avenge Billy. So like that would have happened. And 3, even though the people who were killed were part of a stab movie, like you still have the whole thing with Roman. So like, he probably would have wanted to continue to seek his revenge no matter what. Maybe if we're getting into 4, maybe at that point it's like, yeah, maybe the popularization of this story through books and movies is what sustained it for so long. But like, I'm not here to like blame Gale for people reading her books and watching movies based on her books and deciding to murder people. I'm not the kind of person who thinks that violence in media gets people to be violent. Like, I watch a lot of violent media and I've never hurt anybody. So people who, say that they're inspired by things that they see in the media, that's on them. That's their personal problem. I mean, hey, Billy says it himself. Movies don't create psychos. They just make the psychos more creative. But if there's no more books, and that then effectively means there's no more stab movies, they could just keep making the movies. I think from what I understand, like after the first 3, they don't even use like the Woodsboro story anymore, and it's just like completely spiraled out of control. But that does bring me back to like, if stab is not part of this anymore, what would the next movie be about? Like if that's not an element, it completely throws like my theory that someone would intentionally try to make a bad movie to get them to stop. I guess there are like still kind of characters that we don't know a lot about, like Sam and Tara's parents. We don't see them at all in this movie. Their dad left when he found out that Billy was Sam's dad. And their mom is like away on a business trip for the entire movie. So maybe there's something with them and like that family drama. I guess that's another possibility. And maybe we're just kind of done with like the stab element of the series. So then just kind of like miscellaneous things that I liked about the movie. It was easily the best opening scene since the original. Like Roger Jackson, a king, like just such good voice work. Like I'm so used to that first phone call immediately like getting sinister. I'm not gonna do the voice because I can't and that would just be embarrassing. But starting like so sinister already. And when Tara answers the phone, he's like kind of fumbling and he starts out kind of nervous because he's pretending to be this like her mom's boyfriend or something, and then it like just gets slowly and slowly and slowly more sinister and menacing, and it's done at like it's paced so perfectly and it's fantastic. I also like I found myself playing along with the stab trivia in my head because like all the questions are things that like if you've seen all the Scream movies you would know the answer to. So I feel like that's just like a really cool meta thing to do because they probably knew people were going to be doing that, and there were even people in the theater who were like yelling the answers out. I just thought that was a great way to build on what, you know, a premise that we have retread many times now. And just like the greatest subversion of what was once a subversion itself and has now become a cliche. Like not only does Tara not die, in the scene. She survives the entire movie and ends up killing one of the killers and is like integral to the plot and a main character. She's not just like sort of this, you know, kind of one-off character that doesn't really contribute a lot to the plot besides dying. So I just thought that was a great subversion of the trope that the original movie invented. And again, I don't know how you beat that, but like again, I am open to the possibilities. Like perhaps my mind just doesn't go there, but I just thought it was really great. There was also this kind of interesting through line that they didn't really touch on, but it was kind of how a lot of the people who died because they thought that someone else was going to be killed, and so they were doing things to make sure that that person wasn't going to be killed. I think that's really smart because like obviously like slashers have been around forever, and it's like sometimes it's like no, get off the phone and run, hang up, call the police. Like it gets really frustrating, but I think when someone else is in danger and you're not immediately near them and all that you can think to do is to just like keep someone talking on the phone so that they don't kill your friend, they don't kill your son, like I think that's a really smart way to up the drama, and like it fakes you out of like who's actually going to die. So like, you know, we think that Wes is going to die in the shower. I mean, he dies shortly thereafter, but like, you know, as Judy's racing home, like we're thinking she's racing the clock to get home before Wes is killed. But like Ghostface is waiting for her like right on her porch, and like there's like to me there is nothing scarier than horror like that happening in broad daylight. Like it's, I mean, she's going to pick up sushi, so it's probably around dinner time. It's probably like 5 in the afternoon, but like the sun is high in the sky and it is bright out, not a cloud to be seen. And this woman is just getting stabbed to death on her front walk. Like that's terrifying. Like that's one of the reasons like Midsummer works so well for me, is because once they get to Sweden, it's never completely dark at any point that they're there. And so it's scarier to me this stuff happening in the light because it's less expected than like obviously a lot of horror movies use night and the dark to kind of cover things, and it's like the dark is like inherently scary because you don't know what's there, but like light we just sort of assume is safer. So that whole scene was really great, and just again like that to get her back to the house and to do that fake out was like really effective. So as I kind of said at the beginning, there's only one thing that I really didn't like, and it's not the whole element of the story is fine, but the way that they did it I did not care for, and that is Billy hallucination Billy appearing in the mirror to Sam. It was just so tonally jarring, like not just for this movie, but the entire series. And it just like all of a sudden it's just happening, and it's like it comes out of kind of nowhere, and it's so unexpected, and like and not in like a good way. Like it's unexpected in a like, oh, why is this happening kind of way. And like the effect is just really bad. Like it must be the same kind of effect that they used for the end of the new Candyman when you see Tony Todd for like 2 seconds, but that works because it's for 2 seconds. This is, I think he shows up like at least 3 times, and it like lingers, and you know, so it's Skeet Ulrich like digitally de-aged. I mean, like, in Captain Marvel, they were able to digitally de-age Samuel L. Jackson, like, really seamlessly, and I remember just being, like, gobsmacked by how good that looked. Maybe that technology is, like, prohibitively expensive, I'm not sure, but it was just, like, it was so unsettling, and I didn't want to, I do not care to perceive digitally de-aged Skeet Ulrich during these difficult times. And just like it just felt like such a lazy way to like introduce that plot point. Like people are already talking about Billy. Like there are plenty of other organic ways to get Sam to eventually tell Tara and to tell the audience like her whole backstory of being Billy's secret love child. And then I just at the end I just had this sort of moment of confusion that like kind of took me out of the whole thing. So at the very end, you know, when it seems like Richie's gonna get Sam and she has nowhere else to turn and it's all over, like Billy appears like in the mirror as he does in her hallucinating mind, and he like nods to where a knife is, and like I thought for like half a second, like, has that knife been sitting under that curtain for 25 years? Like, is that a knife that got let go in the original melee and like in all the investigation of the crime scene and Stu's parents moving out and Amber's parents moving in and any, you know, other people who may have lived there, like this knife has just been there? And, like obviously not. It was just like a knife that had gotten thrown there and he was like guiding her to it. But then that like brings another element. Like again, I know it's not like Billy's ghost or anything, like it's her hallucinating mind, but it almost is like because everything's happening so fast and it's like you're just, you know, I'm just like kind of processing things and just sort of like having my first gut reactions to them. But it's like, you know, it's almost like, oh, so Billy, is he like a good guy? Now he's like helping. It every time he came up, I feel like I was filled with all the wrong things, like things that the movie didn't want me to think. Like that's what I mean. It's just so jarring and just took me out of it that like my sense of logic of like what was happening just like completely evaporated. So I just feel like there was a better way to do it, and I hated it. And I hope it like if this continues and Sam is still her final girl and we're still following her journey about her like coming to grips with who she is, like that needs to stop. Like I could not stand that, and I hated it. I will say I like that Sydney like doesn't care that Billy was cheating on her and had a baby with somebody else. Billy cheating on her and getting another girl pregnant is like on the list of terrible things he did to Sydney is dead bottom. Like there are like 50 other things that come before that. And I'm glad, like I was so worried that they were going to make it like a weird like source of tension between Sydney and Sam, and it was just going to be like kind of like a sort of side conflict. And like obviously Sam is like nervous to talk to Sydney because like she kind of knows the whole deal. But I love how Sydney immediately is just like, no, like to be honest, she's probably glad. Like she's like, I'm glad that wasn't me. Like that was somebody else's problem. Like I have enough shit to deal with over here. But yeah, overall, I really liked it. It was not what I was expecting at all for this movie to be, and I was extremely pleasantly surprised by so much of it. But let me know in the comments below. What did you think? What did you like? What did you not like? I feel like generally the reception to the movie has been pretty positive, but I'm sure there are detractors and things that people didn't like about it, and I'm interested to hear. So I started this channel in October. My first video of, well, now 3, was me reacting to the trailer for Scream, and I'd wanted to be more consistent about it. Like this is something that I'm really passionate about doing. But like work and life and stuff just got into the way. So one of my resolutions for the new year is to be a little bit more consistent at posting and coming up with video ideas. I don't know what those ideas are going to be. I don't know what else I want this channel to be. All 3 videos that I have up now are related to horror. I love horror, but I have a lot of other interests, so I'm hoping to kind of branch out. So I'm not sure what my next video will be. And if that sort of chaos and uncertainty appeals to you, hit subscribe for a surprise. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.